Journalism is dead, but what we're seeing play out now is far worse. The alt-radical left propaganda media has created what I call an informational crisis in this country, and they can no longer be trusted. Let me explain. Now, after the resignation of Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, the media is rushing to paint what is a completely false narrative. Let's start with the New York Times and their so-called bombshell report that the press is running absolutely wild with. In reality, it amounts to nothing more than a fake news political hit piece. The Times ran this headline, quote, Trump campaign aides had repeated contacts with Russian intelligence. Now, in it, the writers cite 4 current and former unnamed American officials who offer up vague details about intercepted communications between members of the Trump campaign and Russian officials. But buried in the stories are major caveats, CYAs for them. For example, the only Trump campaign member named was his former campaign manager, Paul Manafort, and we already knew he did business in Russia and Ukraine. It's nothing new. And then there's this, quote, the officials would not disclose many details, including what was discussed on the calls, the identity of the Russian intelligence officials who participated, and how many of Mr. Trump's advisors were talking to the Russians. It is also unclear whether the conversations had anything to do with Mr. Trump himself. So the story is very light on details and actual facts and very heavy on assumption. Then you have Chuck Todd, NBC. He's trying to capitalize off of Flynn's resignation, and this is what he said.
Good evening. I'm Chuck Todd here in Washington. Welcome to MTP Daily, and welcome to day one of what is arguably the biggest presidential scandal involving a foreign government since Iran-Contra.
Well, the same guy that said it's a religious litmus test when 90% of the world's Muslims are not included. I'll get to that in a minute. Let me set the record straight, because so-called journalist Chuck Todd, and by the way, he's no Tim Russert, is refusing to do so. Yes, Mike Flynn was wrong. He misled the president and vice president about his call with the Russian ambassador. But so far, there's zero evidence that Flynn broke any law in any way. And Fox News is reporting that there's zero indication that Flynn misled the FBI when they interviewed him. So, of course, this is only the beginning. Take a look at what Thomas Friedman, the whining liberal from the New York Times, Trump hater that he is, watch what he says.
The issue is, what did he tell Trump? Did he and Trump actually cook up this whole thing? Yeah. After the Russians did not respond harshly to the eviction of their spies and diplomats, Trump actually tweeted out some positive encouragement of this. Did the two of them cook this up all along? And it gets Joe to 2 other issues. The first is, we have never taken seriously from the very beginning, Russia hacked our election. That was a 9/11 scale event. They attacked the core of our very democracy. That was a Pearl Harbor scale event.
Really? You're going to compare this to 9/11 and Pearl Harbor, where thousands of Americans died? Now, if Friedman ever bothered to do some research and read the joint report from the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security, it found Russia did not interfere in the election vote totals in any way. Then there's this disgraced former news anchor, kind of laughable, Dan Rather. He took to Facebook to write this idiotic quote: Watergate is the biggest political scandal of my lifetime until maybe now. It was the closest we came to debilitating a debilitating constitutional crisis until maybe now. Really? Maybe? Possibly? Now, this abusively biased coverage, this false narrative, has even led to a Democratic congressman to use the word treason when talking about an American hero, Michael Flynn, General Flynn. Watch this.
If members of the administration are essentially conspiring with Russia, either through the campaign earlier or now in the administration itself, I mean, look, Wolf, that's the definition of treason. This is a very, very serious affair.
Now, of course, you know that the Flynn resignation is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the alt-left propaganda media and their coordinated campaign to purposely misinform you, the American people. They have an agenda. They've also claimed that the president's temporary travel ban, remember this, is either a religious test or anti-Muslim, even though 90% of the world's Muslims are not included. Watch this.
And Mr. Trump established a religious test for refugees from those Muslim countries.
All right, great fear-mongering, but the facts say otherwise. The 7 countries impacted by the ban were first designated by the Obama administration and Congress because they have ties to terror. And as I reiterated, 90% of the world's Muslim population, which is over 40-plus Muslim-majority countries, are not affected in any way. So the breathlessness and the alt-left propaganda media's coverage, it's astounding. Now, all these examples show exactly why you, the American people, should not trust the lazy leftist propaganda media. It's also why President Trump is going to call on non-traditional media outlets at his press conferences, like he did. Take a look, by the way, how CNN reacted. This is priceless.
In the last 3 news conferences, Wolf, all of the questions to the American news media have been handled by conservative press. And I think, Wolf, there's no other way to describe it, but the fix is in. This White House, this president does not want to answer questions, critical questions, about his associates, his aides' contacts with the Russians during the course of that campaign.
Well, maybe CNN shouldn't have colluded with Hillary Clinton's campaign and tried to cover it up. There's a pretty reasonable response there. Now, it's pretty simple. You have a bunch of overpaid partisan hacks that are lazy, throwing one giant hissy fit because their candidate lost. And because of that, they're carrying out this endless, all-out assault against President Trump. Here tonight with reaction, the U.S. editor at large for DailyMail.com, Piers Morgan, and former U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia, Joe DeGeneva. You know, Piers, I know you. I love the Daily Mail. I read it every day. You're a hard-hitting guy. You've gone after Trump when you disagree with him. You've also praised him when you think he does the right thing. Don't you think that the media in this country has lost all perspective?
I don't think it's just the media. I think there are large swathes of the American people who've lost their minds, and the media are fueling this crazy hysteria. You know, here's what I think has happened. The media in America, the mainstream media, print and cable and main network news, they kind of collaborated in fueling the beast of Donald Trump. When he first ran, they started by saying he was a joke. Then they realized he was getting ratings. Then they gave him the airtime. Then they put him on the front pages. They kept fueling. But they never imagined he might actually win. And while they were fueling, he was out there running around America, galvanizing and resonating with the American people in Middle America, way away from the two coasts. And then came the moment when the American media went, we've got to kill this guy off. This is out of control. But rather like Dr. Frankenstein, it was too late. The beast that they had helped create, as they see it, could not be killed off, and he won the presidency. What I don't like about what is going on now is there is an absolutely frenzied and concerted attempt to delegitimize, sabotage, and destroy the Trump presidency before it's even started. I think that is un-American. I don't think it's a patriotic thing that they're doing. I think it's nakedly partisan. It's driven by the New York Times, who were completely in the tank for Hillary Clinton. And I think that as a journalist who worked at CNN for 4 years, where CNN always tried to be, I know your view about CNN, but has a lot of good people there. I think they've got to be careful, all of them. They've got to look at what they're doing here and ask themselves, is this legitimate journalistic rigor, or is it incredibly partisan, often nakedly abusive treatment of a new president? And I think, I'm afraid, it's bordering on the latter. This Russian scandal, when you play some journalists who I completely respect, when you play them talking about this being the new Watergate, being Pearl Harbor, 9/11, you know, the biggest scandal since Iran-Contra and so on, this is a wildly exaggerated view as the facts currently stand. The facts are there is nothing right now to link Donald Trump to any collusion with anyone from Russia in relation to the American election.
Piers,
nothing.
I gotta
Nothing. Niet.
That is, you have laid out an extraordinarily powerful indictment against journalism and the media in this country. Let me ask you a follow-up question. And all right, we had a competitive, it's not really competitive, but okay, you mentioned CNN. But when WikiLeaks revealed the level of collusion with the news media and Hillary Clinton's campaign, I'm sure even you were shocked and surprised that it ran so deep on so many levels, and how corrupt that is.
Well, look, I think most people at CNN are thoroughly decent journalists, and I respect their integrity.
But they still colluded.
Well, Sean, when you saw the behavior of people like Donna Brazile, who I work with a lot at CNN, deliberately feeding questions to the Clinton camp for debates, I mean, I was completely shocked by that. But I was also shocked when I picked up the New York Times in the middle of the campaign and saw 11 different pieces, including letters, about Donald Trump in one issue, and all 11 were negative, including 4 letters. Now, what does that tell you? What it told me was you have a very partisan paper masquerading as a paper of record. Today's expose, the bombshell by the New York Times, when you actually read it, admits itself it has nothing to link Donald Trump to this. Now, I think it's perfectly reasonable, just to make this point, Sean, it's perfectly reasonable when a national security advisor resigns like General Flynn within 3 weeks of getting the job, for journalists to do their job and go after that. And actually, Donald Trump, I think, should answer questions from CNN and others at press conferences. It's reasonable to go after the story. It's not reasonable to make everybody through the slant of your coverage believe this is Armageddon, Trump's in there with Putin, he's clearly fixed the election, and so on.
Let me bring in Joe DeGenova, who I respect as one of Washington's great legal minds. And Joe, I'll put up, let me just ask you a very simple question. Go through from a legal aspect the intelligence leaks that are going on here, how it would violate the Espionage Act, how it violates 18 U.S. Code 798, which we'll get into in more detail. Tell me what you think is really going on with these intelligence leaks, which we all know are illegal, and is that the bigger story?
It is now clear from published information that people who had authorized access to signals intelligence under the Espionage Act, cryptographic intelligence, telephone intercepts, wiretaps, have given that information in violation of the law to news organizations and other parties who are not authorized to receive them. Those disclosures by people who got the information lawfully are crimes. They are felonies under the Espionage Act. The Attorney General should immediately impanel a grand jury and start subpoenaing the limited number of people who have lawful access to these telephone intercepts. That number of people is quite small, and they can start issuing subpoenas to those people, have them interviewed by the FBI, put them in the grand jury, and I can assure you that with the reasonable prosecutor, you can find out who disclosed this information by looking at their telephone records, their emails, and everything else related to how they communicate with third parties.
You have no doubt felonies were committed. You have no doubt the intelligence community, or a few members within the intelligence community, have done this on purpose. They've done it now numerous times, conversations with Mexico and Australia, for example, and this particular case, that numerous felonies are committed, and you think it will be fairly easy to discover who it was?
Yes, with the use of a grand jury, which was not used in the Hillary Clinton email server case, you can find out as much information as you need to about this, because what is happening here is a coup d'etat. This is designed not to just delegitimize President Trump. This is designed to create the atmospherics for an impeachment and for other legal stratagems to destroy his presidency. If the Attorney General thinks about this for about 5 minutes, there will be a grand jury at work, sure as the sun will rise tomorrow.
All right, I got to thank both of you. Very powerful statements. Piers, Joe, thank you both for being with us. And coming up next tonight, right here on Hannity.
I think it's very, very unfair what's happened to General Flynn, the way he was treated, and the documents and papers that were illegally, I stress that, illegally leaked. Very, very unfair.
President Trump talking about these illegal leaks that forced Mike Flynn to resign. Up next, Congressman Devin Nunes, he heads the committee that looks into this, and Congressman Steve King weigh in later.